My name is Naomi Oduya, and I never expected to die at 29 years old. I wasn't sick. I had no underlying conditions, no premonitions, no eerie dreams, no signs that my time was coming. It was just a normal evening. I had just finished a long shift at the clinic. Being a nurse in the city had its challenges. Long hours, exhaustion, dealing with patients who either didn't trust you or clung to you like their last hope. That day had been particularly stressful. A mother had come in with her baby, frantic, eyes wild with fear. The child had a fever so high that even I panicked for a second before shifting into action. Hours later, after the crisis had passed and the baby was stable, I had stepped outside for a breath of fresh air. The night was thick and humid, the air heavy with the scent of exhaust fumes and the lingering aroma of street food from the vendors across the road. I remember standing there, rolling my stiff shoulders, thinking about how tired I was. I just wanted to go home, take a shower, sleep. I had no idea I would never make it home. The bus ride was uneventful at first. I sat by the window, staring at the blurred city lights as we sped past. The hum of the engine, the distant sound of a baby crying, the low chatter of passengers. It was all so normal, so painfully ordinary. I remember checking my phone, scrolling mindlessly through messages, liking a picture my cousin had posted. I even texted my sister that I had a long day and couldn't wait to sleep. I never got to read her response. The crash came out of nowhere. 1 second everything was fine. The next, there was screaming, metal groaning, a sickening lurch as the entire world turned upside down. I didn't even have time to process what was happening. The impact was like an explosion, a deafening roar of shattered glass and twisting steel. My body jerked forward, my head slamming against something hard. Pain burst through me, a sharp, blinding pain. Then, nothing. Blackness, stillness. I don't know how long I was trapped in that void. There was no time here, no sound, no feeling, just a deep, endless nothingness stretching in every direction. I should have been afraid, should have felt panic, desperation, something. But all I felt was an eerie kind of awareness, like I was waiting. Then something changed. A pull, not physical, not like being grabbed, but a sensation so strong it yanked me from that emptiness. And suddenly, I could see. I was still in the wreckage, but I wasn't in my body. I floated above the scene, watching in silent horror as people scrambled, bleeding, screaming, calling for help. The bus lay on its side, crushed against the railing, the front end smashed in from the impact. I saw bodies, some moving, some not. Glass scattered everywhere like fallen stars. And then I saw myself, my own body, crumpled in a way that no living person should be. Blood trailing from my forehead, eyes half open but unseeing. I was dead. The realization hit like a cold shockwave, but I couldn't even react. Because at that moment something else happened. A shift, a disturbance in the very air around me. And then, a light. Not just any light, not like headlights or flashlights, or even the golden glow of the sun. This was something else. It wasn't just brightness. It was alive, moving, breathing. It was calling me. I didn't walk toward it. I didn't move at all. But somehow I was being pulled, drawn in. And as I was pulled, the world I had known, my body, the wreckage, the screaming people, began to fade. I was leaving everything behind, and I had no idea where I was going. I should have been afraid. I was dead. That thought should have consumed me, should have sent waves of panic through my soul. But as I drifted from the wreckage, as the earthly world faded behind me, something strange happened. I felt weightless. Not just in the physical sense, but in a way I had never known before. It was as if every burden I had ever carried, Every worry, every regret, every unspoken pain had been stripped away. The heaviness of life was gone. I was free. But free to go where? The light that had pulled me in was all around me now, but it wasn't blinding. It was warm, embracing, alive. It wrapped around me, filling me, as though it had been waiting for me all along. And within that light, I felt something else, something even more overwhelming. Love. Not the kind of love I had known on earth. Not the fragile, conditional kind. This love was limitless. It had no edges, no bottom, no walls. It wasn't just something I felt, it was something I became a part of. I wanted to stay in it forever, but something told me this was only the beginning. Then, the light shifted. At first, I thought I was still floating in the void, but slowly, something formed before me. Shapes, shadows, a new reality coming into view. It was like stepping through an unseen door. One moment, I was in the light, and the next, I was somewhere else entirely. And that's when I saw them. People. At first, they were only silhouettes, moving in the distance, like figures behind a veil. But as I focused, they became clearer. Hundreds of them. No, thousands. Stretching out in every direction, walking along a vast, endless landscape. Some were moving with purpose, as if they knew exactly where they were going. Others wandered, confused, uncertain, their eyes searching for something unseen. And the air, there was something strange about it. It was heavy, not like the humidity of earth, not in a way that pressed on my body. It was heavy in a deeper sense, a weight that settled on the soul. I could hear murmurs, whispers, fragments of voices, some filled with wonder, others with sorrow. It was as if every person here was realizing something at the same time, that they were no longer alive. A presence moved beside me. I turned, expecting to see another soul. But what I saw, what I felt, made my entire being tremble. A figure stood there watching me, not human, yet not unfamiliar, taller than any man, draped in robes that shimmered like woven starlight. His face, I could not fully see it, yet somehow I knew it. An angel. The realization struck my soul like thunder. He was unlike anything I had ever imagined. No wings, no halo, no soft glowing features like in the paintings. He was fierce, powerful, radiant beyond comprehension. And when he spoke, his voice didn't just enter my ears, it vibrated through my very essence. "Naomi," he said, and the sound of my name sent ripples through the air. "You have crossed over." This is the space between life and eternity. The realization should have shaken me, but I could barely form a thought before another question arose. Where was I? I turned my gaze back to the thousands of people around me. Some stood in small groups, weeping. Some called out names, searching for loved ones. Others stood alone, staring at something unseen in the distance, as if waiting. And then I saw those who were different. A handful of souls walked with certainty, their expressions calm. They weren't wandering. They weren't searching. They knew. Their eyes held understanding. I looked back at the angel, my voice trembling. "What is this place?" His gaze was steady. "The crossing." My mind raced, trying to grasp what that meant. "Is this heaven?" A pause. A silence so deep it felt like eternity itself had stopped to listen. Then, the angel said something that sent chills through me. "Not yet." I gasped as something pulled at me, a force so strong it made my soul shudder. The entire space around me blurred. The wandering souls, the landscape, even the angel, all of it faded. And suddenly, I was falling, not downward, not like gravity pulling me into the earth. I was falling through something deeper than space itself. Memories flashed before me. Not my memories. Something else. Images of places I had never seen, faces I had never met. I saw great mountains stretching toward the sky, rivers that shimmered with colors unknown to Earth. I saw cities older than time, filled with people who shone like fire. And then I saw darkness, a creeping, slithering shadow. It moved through history, twisting, corrupting. I saw lands being taken, languages being lost, people being broken under the weight of chains. I saw Africa. Not the Africa the world had told me about, not the one shown in books or on television. I saw it as it had once been, before the corruption, before the invasion, before the lies. Majestic, glorious. A land of kings and queens, of scholars and builders, of warriors and poets. A land that had known God before the world had tried to erase him from it. I gasped, clutching my chest as the weight of the vision filled me. What was I seeing? Why was I seeing it? And then, just as suddenly as it had started, the visions stopped. I found myself standing in an empty space, my breath coming in shaky gasps. The silence around me was deafening, but I could feel something, a presence. Something was coming. Someone. I turned, my heart pounding, my entire soul trembling. And then I saw him. I couldn't move. I couldn't speak. All of existence seemed to collapse into this one moment, this one being standing before me. Jesus. I knew it before my mind could form the thought. I didn't need an introduction, didn't need a voice to confirm it. My soul knew. Every part of me recognized him, as if I had always known him, even before my birth. His presence was beyond anything words could capture. He was light, not just surrounded by it, but made of it. A light that wasn't just brightness, but something alive, something that was. It moved, it breathed, shifting through colors that had never existed on Earth. And yet, more than the brilliance, more than the overwhelming power radiating from him, it was his eyes that undid me, eyes that held eternity. They weren't just looking at me, they were looking through me, into every thought I had ever had, every moment of my life, every hidden wound and unspoken regret. Nothing was concealed. I was fully known. And yet, in that knowing, there was no condemnation, only love. A love so deep, so complete, that it shattered every doubt I had ever carried. I wanted to fall to my knees, or maybe I did. I wasn't even sure I had a body anymore. All I knew was that I was before him, and that changed everything. Naomi, my name, spoken from his lips. It wasn't just sound, it was truth itself. His voice resonated through my being, more than words, more than language. It was like hearing the foundation of the universe, the very breath of God. You are not here by accident. The moment he said it, I saw. My life unfolded before me, not just memories, but layers of meaning I had never noticed before. Every moment of pain, of loss, of joy, of searching, it had all led to this. Every question I had ever asked, every doubt I had ever carried, he had seen it all. And he had been there, even when I had felt alone, even when I had walked away, even when I had questioned if he was real. He had never left me. Tears streamed down my face, or at least I felt as if they did. But this place, this moment, was beyond anything earthly. Jesus. The name barely escaped my lips, but saying it felt like the purest act of worship. He looked at me, and in that instant, I felt the weight of eternity. Then, suddenly, visions. Not like memories, not like dreams. These were alive, more vivid than anything I had ever seen. It was as if I was being pulled through time itself, watching history unfold before my eyes. I saw creation. The moment the universe was spoken into existence, not as an explosion, but as a song. every atom, every star, every breath of life moving in harmony with his voice. Then I saw the first people. I gasped. They were black, not just dark-skinned, but radiant, shimmering with divine light. Their presence was powerful, their connection to God unbroken. They walked with him, spoke with him, knew him, not through religion, not through doctrine, but through direct communion. They were royalty, the first kings, the first queens. They carried wisdom, knowledge beyond human understanding. They were the foundation, the beginning of civilization itself. I saw the lands they built, vast, flourishing, filled with beauty that defied imagination. I saw them craft, create, build wonders that would one day be buried, hidden, erased from history. And then a shadow crept in. Not all at once, but slowly, like a sickness spreading. I saw the deception take root, whispers twisting truth, planting division where none had existed before. I saw the lies begin, lies that told them they were less, lies that convinced them they were cursed, unwanted, forsaken. I saw it all, nations rising, empires falling, and I saw how the truth of who they were was stolen from them, rewritten, reshaped by those who sought power. The names of their kings erased, their history dismantled, their connection to God severed, not because he left them, but because they had been deceived into believing he was never theirs to begin with. I wept, because for the first time, I understood. The vision shifted again. I saw ships crossing oceans, chains clinking against human flesh. I saw blood spilled, backs broken, families torn apart. I saw the cries of mothers, the silent agony of fathers who could do nothing as their children were ripped from them. And yet, Jesus was there. In the belly of the ships, among the suffering, in the cries of the oppressed, he was there, weeping, holding them. But the world refused to see him. Instead, they built a false image of him, a version that justified their greed, their cruelty, a version that turned him into a tool for oppression rather than liberation. And worst of all, I saw how his own people, the ones who had first walked with him, the ones who had carried his truth, had been taught to forget. I turned to Jesus, desperate, my soul trembling. Why? His expression was filled with sorrow, because they do not know who they are. I saw it then, the greatest deception of all. The enemy had not simply enslaved a people, he had enslaved their identity. He had buried their history, erased their glory, turned their own story against them. And now, generations later, they walked in the world believing they were nothing more than what they had been told, not knowing they were the foundation, not knowing they had once ruled, not knowing they had once walked with God himself. And then, one final vision. I saw a great awakening, a moment when the truth would be restored, when the deception would be shattered. I saw voices rising, chains breaking, people remembering who they were. I saw a new generation stepping into their divine purpose, and I saw Jesus standing in the midst of them, not as a stranger, not as a foreign god, but as their own. The vision faded. I found myself before him once more, my soul shaking under the weight of what I had seen. Jesus looked at me, his eyes burning with urgency. "Tell them." And in that moment, I knew I could never be silent again. I was still reeling, struggling to process everything I had seen. The weight of it pressed down on me, not just as knowledge, but as a truth so profound that it reshaped everything I thought I knew about the world. And yet, Jesus wasn't done. The atmosphere around us shifted. It wasn't just a vision this time. It was as if time itself folded, and suddenly, I was inside history. No longer a distant observer, but standing in the very midst of the events that had shaped the world as we know it. I saw Africa before the scars, a land of breathtaking beauty, untouched and flourishing. Rivers like liquid crystal, mountains that reached into the heavens, cities, vast, structured, filled with light. Not the primitive huts they had taught us in school, not the broken images the world had fed us. No, this was civilization in its purest form. I saw libraries filled with knowledge, scrolls upon scrolls of wisdom written in languages now long forgotten. I saw mathematicians, scientists, healers, men and women who understood the earth, the stars, the human body in ways far beyond what modern science discovered. I saw gold, not as a luxury, but as an everyday reality. Roads paved with it, buildings adorned with it. Not for vanity, but because wealth had not yet been twisted into greed. These people lacked nothing. They knew who they were. They knew whose they were. They knew that their wisdom, their power, their authority came from God Himself. Then I saw the war begin. Not a war of weapons, but something far more insidious. A war of the mind, a war of the spirit. It started with whispers, lies planted like seeds, taking root where faith had once stood. I saw the slow poisoning of knowledge, the subtle twisting of history. I saw outsiders arrive, not with chains, not yet, but with something more dangerous. False doctrine, false gods, false promises. They came under the guise of trade, of friendship, of progress. But behind their smiles, I saw the shadows lurking, greed, jealousy, fear. They had seen Africa's greatness, and they feared it. They had seen its wisdom, and they envied it. They had seen its people walking with God, and they hated it. And so they did what the enemy had done from the beginning. They deceived. They convinced some that their own ways were outdated, primitive. They offered gifts laced with curses, agreements built on betrayal. And slowly, so slowly that most did not even realize it was happening, the foundation of Africa began to crack. They turned kings against kings, brothers against brothers, tribes against tribes, divide and conquer. It was never about physical chains. The real goal had always been to steal their identity. Because once a people forget who they are, they can be controlled. I saw the moment Africa fell. I saw the betrayal, the selling of their own people, the opening of doors that were never meant to be opened. And then the ships came, the chains, the whips. The agony of a people ripped from their land, their history, their God-given authority. I watched as millions were taken, scattered across the earth, their names stripped from them, their tongues stolen, their worship outlawed. Not just their bodies were enslaved, their souls were under attack. And all the while, I saw the enemy laughing. Because this had never been about race. This had never been about land. This was about destroying a people that had once walked in direct communion with God. This was about burying the truth so deep that it would never be found again. I turned to Jesus, tears streaming down my face. "This is evil," I choked. "Why did you allow this?" His face was full of sorrow. "I did not allow it. The world rejected my ways, and they still do." I wanted to argue, to demand why he hadn't stopped it, but before I could, he lifted his hand. And I saw something else. I saw the rebellion, the ones who never bowed, the ones who sang his name in the fields, who prayed in secret, who refused to let the truth die. I saw them whispering their real names to their children in the dead of night. I saw them passing down stories, songs, memories, hiding their history in their hearts where no master could steal it. I saw the warriors. Not the ones with swords, but the ones who fought with faith. The ones who refused to let their spirits be broken, even as their bodies were whipped and beaten. And then I saw something even more powerful. I saw a prophecy, a time when the children of the enslaved would rise again, when the truth would return, when the scattered would remember who they were. I saw Africa's sons and daughters awakening, not just in Africa, but across the world, in America, in the Caribbean, in South America, in Europe. Everywhere they had been scattered, the blood that had been spilled had cried out to God, and now the time of awakening was coming. I looked at Jesus, my soul trembling. "What do I do?" I whispered. His eyes burned with fire. "Tell them." I swallowed hard, fear creeping into my chest. "What if they don't believe me?" "That is not your concern. Speak the truth, and those with ears to hear will listen." I felt something shift inside me, a strength that was not my own. I had seen, I had witnessed. And now I had no choice but to tell the world. Because everything I had been taught, everything we had all been taught, had been a lie. The black man was never cursed. The black woman was never forsaken. They had been chosen, and the world had spent centuries trying to make them forget it. But now the truth was returning, and nothing would ever be the same again. After Jesus told me to tell them, I felt something shift inside me, something unbreakable, a strength that wasn't my own. But before I could even process it, the vision pulled me deeper. It was as if I was falling, not in fear, not in pain, but into revelation. And when I landed, I stood in a place that made my spirit tremble. I was standing on a battlefield, not a battlefield of swords and spears, not one of guns and bombs. This was something far older. The sky above me swirled in colors too rich, too deep for words. The ground beneath me pulsed, not with life, but with something else, something ancient, something sacred. And then I saw it, the blood. It soaked the earth, deep and unyielding, as if it had been spilled for centuries without ever drying. I knew in my spirit that I was looking at the blood of the black men and women who had suffered, who had been stolen, who had been slaughtered. The blood of kings and queens, the blood of children and elders, the blood of the innocent. It spoke, it cried out, and as I listened, I heard its song. It wasn't a wail of defeat, it was a war cry, a declaration, a promise. The blood had not been shed in vain. And just as Abel's blood cried out to God from the ground, the blood of Africa's sons and daughters had reached heaven's throne. I turned, my heart pounding, and saw Jesus standing in the midst of it. His robe, pure and untouched, flowed like light itself, and yet his feet stood in the blood, not above it, not avoiding it, in it. The moment I realized this, something inside me shattered. Tears poured down my face as I fell to my knees. He had never ignored it. He had never turned away. Every cry, every injustice, every life taken, he had been there. Even when the world acted as if black suffering was invisible, even when history tried to erase the truth, Jesus had never been blind to it. He reached out his hand, and as he did, I saw a shift in the vision. The blood that had soaked the earth did something unexpected. It moved, not as a flood, not as destruction, but as restoration. It rose like living waters, covering the wounds of the past, healing the fractures, calling back everything that had been stolen. I gasped as I saw the spirits of those who had died in chains, those who had been silenced, those who had been broken, standing tall, radiant, victorious, not as slaves, not as victims, but as warriors. And then I saw the next part of the revelation. I was taken to a different place, one that made my breath hitch. I saw churches, large ones, small ones, old ones, new ones. I saw cathedrals towering into the sky and humble houses of worship tucked away in hidden corners of the world. I expected to see holiness, truth, righteousness. But instead, I saw a distortion. I saw preachers standing on pulpits, holding the Bible in one hand and a chain in the other. I saw them twisting scripture, using God's word to justify slavery, to justify oppression, to strip away the identity of a people chosen by God himself. And then I saw something worse. I saw modern churches still carrying the same chains, not physical ones, but chains of the mind, chains that preached a version of Jesus that looked nothing like the one standing before me now, chains that kept black people from knowing who they truly were, chains that made them believe they were cursed, forgotten, lesser, lies wrapped in religion. I turned to Jesus, my soul burning. "Why?" I whispered. "Why did they do this?" His eyes held both sorrow and power. "Because the truth would have set you free." I saw it then. The truth had always been a threat. If black people had known, truly known, who they were, the world would not have been able to control them. They would have walked in divine authority. They would have built nations that could not be shaken. They would have risen. And so the enemy had done what he always does. He used deception. He made the world rewrite history. He made them believe they were nothing more than slaves, nothing more than a broken people, nothing more than a footnote in someone else's story. But it had all been a lie, a grand, calculated, centuries-old deception. And now, Jesus was revealing the truth. I saw what was coming, a great awakening, a moment in time when the chains of the mind would begin to break, when the truth buried for so long would rise again. I saw black men and women stepping into their original calling, not as the oppressed, not as the forgotten, but as the chosen. I saw them returning to God, not through the lenses of colonized religion, but through the pure, unfiltered truth of who He always was. I saw them healing, restoring, building. I saw justice. I saw vengeance, but not of man, of God. Because the Lord Himself had heard the cries of His people, and He was answering. I turned to Jesus, trembling. What happens next? He looked at me, and in His eyes I saw both warning and promise. The truth is returning. The blood has spoken, and the world is not ready for what comes next. I don't remember the exact moment I left His presence, but I remember the feeling, the unbearable pull, like a force beyond my understanding was drawing me away from the divine light, back towards something heavier, something limited. The warmth of Jesus' presence began to fade, and though I wanted to stay, I knew I couldn't. His final words echoed in my soul, a command that would become my burden and my purpose. Tell them. The descent was violent. If leaving my body had been peaceful, returning was the complete opposite. It was like being forced through a narrow space that wasn't meant to hold me anymore. My spirit crashed into my body, and in an instant, pain consumed me. Gasping, I jolted awake. The hospital ceiling swam into view, bright fluorescent lights piercing my vision. My chest burned, my lungs ached as if I had been suffocating. The heart monitor beside me screamed in frantic beeps. Someone shouted, hands grabbed at me. A mask was shoved over my face. I coughed, choked, tried to sit up, but my body was too weak. "She's back," a voice rang out. A nurse, maybe. "She was gone for 10 minutes," another voice said in shock. The weight of my body felt unnatural, like I didn't belong in it anymore. The hospital room was too loud, too bright, too harsh compared to where I had just been. But none of that mattered. I had seen Jesus. I had been given a message, and I had to tell them. I struggled to remove the oxygen mask. "Listen," I rasped, my throat raw and dry. "I need to tell you something." The doctor shushed me. "Naomi, relax. You've been through a major—" "No!" My voice was weak but desperate. "I died. I was with Jesus. He showed me things. You have to listen." The doctor gave me a look, one I had seen before. It was the look people gave the delirious, the unstable, the ones who weren't making sense. He nodded slowly but didn't believe me. "Rest for now, Naomi," he said. "No, you don't understand. It was real. He showed me the truth about Black Africans, who we really are, our purpose, our history. I have to tell the world." The doctor sighed, scribbling something on his clipboard. The nurse adjusted my IV. No one took me seriously. No one understood the urgency of what I had seen. My heart clenched. This couldn't be happening. I had just experienced the most powerful revelation of my life, of anyone's life, and they thought I was just hallucinating. I turned to my sister, Miriam, who sat in the corner of the room, eyes wide with shock. "Miriam, please," I begged. "You know I wouldn't lie. I saw him. I saw the truth." Miriam swallowed hard, looking away. She had been the one to find me collapsed. She had prayed over my lifeless body, crying for a miracle. And now, here I was, back from the dead. But my words scared her. "Naomi," she started hesitantly, "maybe you were just dreaming. The brain does weird things when—" "No!" My frustration boiled over. "I know what I saw. It wasn't a dream. It was more real than this. He sent me back to tell the truth, and no one is listening." Tears burned my eyes. How could they not believe me? How could they be so blind? A pastor came later that evening, a man my mother had called, thinking I needed spiritual guidance. I tried to tell him everything, but he looked at me with that same doubtful expression. "My dear," he said gently, "God speaks in many ways. But near-death visions can be tricky. The mind is vulnerable." I wanted to scream. Even the church didn't believe me, but I couldn't give up. Jesus had sent me back for a reason. Even if the world refused to listen, I would speak. Even if they doubted me, I would tell them. Because the truth wasn't mine to keep. The days following my return felt unreal, like I was stuck between two worlds. One I had seen with my own soul, and this one where no one believed me. My body was weak, but my spirit was restless. I couldn't sleep without hearing his voice, without feeling the urgency of his words pressing into my chest. Tell them. But how? No one wanted to hear. The doctors dismissed me as delirious. My family was hesitant, unwilling to outright call me crazy, but their silence spoke volumes. Even the church, the very place I thought would understand, tried to pacify me with rehearsed words of comfort, as if I were grieving a hallucination. I wasn't grieving, I was awakened, and I had to make them see. The first time I tried to share my experience outside the hospital was at a family gathering. My mother had organized a small welcome-back dinner, inviting relatives who had been worried about me. I watched them laugh, eat, and talk about things that felt so small now: work, school, money, gossip. Didn't they realize? Didn't they know that none of this mattered compared to what I had seen? I cleared my throat. "I need to tell you all something." The table quieted. Eyes turned to me, expectant. I swallowed hard. When I died, I wasn't just unconscious. I wasn't gone. I was somewhere else. I met Jesus. My uncle chuckled. "Ah, so you had one of those back-from-the-dead dreams, eh?" It wasn't a dream. My voice was firm, unwavering. I was with him. He showed me things about us, about Black Africans, about our history that no one knows. My cousin raised an eyebrow. "And what exactly did he show you?" I hesitated, feeling their skepticism before I even spoke the words. But I couldn't let fear stop me. "He showed me who we really are," I said, my voice growing stronger, "how we were chosen for something great, how the world has lied to us about our true identity, about our purpose. He showed me the pain, the suffering, but also the restoration that's coming. And he told me to tell you." Silence. Then, laughter. "Naomi, my mother said gently, reaching for my hand. Maybe you should rest. You've been through a lot. No, you don't understand. My frustration bubbled over. I saw it. I felt it. Jesus himself revealed it to me, and he sent me back to tell you, to tell the world. My uncle shook his head. People have these experiences all the time, Naomi. Near-death stories, visions. It's just the brain trying to make sense of things. Miriam, my sister, stayed quiet, avoiding my eyes. They didn't believe me. The weight of it crushed me. I pushed back from the table and stood. You're all blind. My voice trembled, but I refused to cry. You'd rather believe lies than the truth standing right in front of you. I walked out before they could say another word. That night I lay awake in my bed, staring at the ceiling, feeling the deepest loneliness I had ever known. Why did you send me back if no one will listen? The question burned in my heart, but deep down, I already knew the answer. It wasn't about whether they believed me now, it was about speaking the truth anyway, because one day they would see. One day, everything Jesus had shown me would come to pass, and when that day came, they would remember my words. I would keep speaking. I would keep telling them, because this wasn't just my burden, it was my calling. I didn't stop speaking, even when they laughed, even when they ignored me, even when my own family tiptoed around me like I was fragile glass about to shatter. I couldn't stop. I started sharing my story online, recording videos about my experience, about what Jesus had revealed to me. Some people listened. Some even reached out, asking me questions, telling me that something in their spirit stirred when they heard my words. But others were not so kind. At first it was just mocking comments, insults like "crazy woman." Another fake prophet looking for attention. Mental illness is real. Someone help her. I could handle that. But then the threats started. Anonymous messages filled my inbox. Stop spreading these lies. You don't know what you're messing with. If you don't shut up, we'll shut you up. At first, I brushed it off. People always attacked the truth. Jesus himself had warned about this. But I couldn't ignore the feeling that something much darker was moving beneath the surface. The first time it happened, I was walking home from a small gathering at a friend's house. It was late, and the streets were quiet. I had been praying under my breath as I walked, asking God for strength. Then, out of nowhere, the feeling hit me, a sudden, suffocating heaviness, like the air around me had thickened, pressing against my skin, wrapping around my throat. My chest tightened, I couldn't breathe, then footsteps behind me. I turned, heart pounding. A man, tall, hooded, his face hidden in the shadows. He didn't run, he didn't say a word, he just stood there, watching me. A cold wave of fear crashed over me, but something deeper, something spiritual, rose within me. This wasn't just a man, this was something else. The fight I had been dragged into wasn't just physical, it was spiritual. I took a step back. Jesus. The name barely escaped my lips, but the moment I said it, the air changed. The heaviness around me lifted slightly, like a pressure being forced back. But the man, he took a step forward, unfazed. I knew then I was being hunted, not just by people, but by the very forces that had spent centuries keeping the truth hidden. I turned and ran. I didn't stop until I reached my house, locking the door behind me, my chest rising and falling with sharp breaths. My body was trembling, but my spirit burned. They were trying to stop me, but they wouldn't win. That night, I barely slept. When I finally drifted off, I had a dream. No, a vision. I was standing on the edge of a battlefield, but I wasn't alone. Behind me were countless others, Black Africans, men and women from all over the world, their eyes shining with something powerful, something unbreakable. and in front of us was darkness. Not just an absence of light, but a living, moving force, writhing like smoke, shifting like shadows with claws. I saw figures moving within it, voices whispering, hissing. Lies. They were built from lies. Lies that had shackled my people for generations. Lies that had rewritten history, distorted identity, buried the truth so deep that even we had forgotten. And then I saw him, Jesus, standing in the center of us, his light pushing back the shadows, his eyes burning with fire. "The battle has already been won," he said, "but you must fight." I woke up with his words ringing in my ears. This wasn't just my fight, it was ours. After that incident, I realized something. The more they tried to silence me, the louder I had to be. Because this wasn't just about me. This was about every Black African whose true history had been erased. Every ancestor who had been stripped of their identity. Every soul who had been told they were less than when they were meant for so much more. I had seen what was coming. The world was on the edge of something massive. The shaking had already begun, and Jesus was calling his people to wake up. One night, as I prayed, I felt his voice again, deep within my spirit. The battle is not against flesh and blood. I understood now. This wasn't about history books, governments, systems, policies. This was about souls. The enemy had spent centuries distorting the truth, twisting history, planting division, making sure we never understood who we really were. And now time was running out, because soon the world would be forced to choose. Would we wake up and see the truth? Would we embrace our true identity, our true calling? Or would we continue to live under the lies, bound by chains we could no longer see? The battle wasn't coming. It had already begun. If you've made it this far, listen to me. This is not a coincidence. You weren't meant to scroll past this. You weren't meant to hear these words and walk away unchanged. Because time is running out. I saw it. I felt it. And now, I'm telling you, you have a choice. Maybe you felt it too. That unease, that feeling that something is shifting. That sense that things aren't what they seem, that a great unveiling is coming. Maybe you've ignored it, pushed it away, convinced yourself you were imagining things. But you weren't. This message has reached you for a reason. This is your wake-up call. Jesus wasn't just speaking to me in that vision, he was speaking to all of us. This is a call to action, a moment of decision that cannot be ignored. It speaks to those who have been waiting, searching and hesitating, but now find themselves at a crossroads. For too long, many have lived in the comfort of indecision, convincing themselves that they had more time, that they could remain neutral, that the battle between truth and deception didn't require their involvement. But the truth has been revealed. The warnings have been spoken. And now, there is no excuse. Jesus has made it clear, there is no middle ground. He said, "Because you are lukewarm, neither hot nor cold, I am about to spit you out of my mouth." Revelation 3:16. This is the moment when lukewarm faith can no longer sustain anyone. The world is shifting, the signs are unfolding, and every person must decide, will you stand for righteousness, or will you shrink back into complacency? To wake up means to see the world as it truly is, to recognize the deception that has kept so many blind, to take up the call of truth, of justice, of God's kingdom, but choosing to turn away, to pretend that none of this matters, is a choice in itself. It is to align with darkness by refusing to step into the light. So this is it. The time for passive faith is over. The time for comfortable ignorance is over. Now, right here, right now, what will you do?